He signed the divorce filing at 9:14 in the morning. His wife was on an operating table by 9:40. He didn't know that yet. He wouldn't know it for another 3 hours, and by the time he did, the paperwork he'd just filed would feel like the smallest thing that had happened to him all year. Daniel Reyes had rehearsed this morning for weeks. Get to the courthouse early, file before the office got busy, be back at his desk before 10 so nobody at the firm would ask where he'd gone. He had not rehearsed what came after. Nobody rehearses the phone call that changes everything, because, by definition, you never see it coming. If this story pulls at you the way it pulled at me while I was putting it together, do one thing before we go further. Hit like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this one travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to a marriage that was ending quietly, on paper, in a courthouse hallway that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Daniel had met Claire 8 years earlier at a fundraiser he hadn't wanted to attend. He remembered almost nothing about the event itself, the silent auction, the string quartet, the small talk with donors he was there to court on behalf of his firm. What he remembered was Claire standing near the dessert table, laughing at something on her own, quietly, like she'd told herself a joke nobody else needed to hear. He'd asked what was funny. She'd said, "You wouldn't laugh. You look like someone who takes desserts very seriously." He had, in fact, taken dessert very seriously that night, and he'd laughed anyway. She was a labor and delivery nurse at Ashford Memorial, the kind of person who came home from 12-hour shifts and still had the energy to ask about his day first. In the early years, that had felt like a gift. By the 6th year, it had started to feel like something he took without noticing, the way you stop noticing a light that's always on. The marriage didn't end with a single event. It ended the way most marriages end, in small withdrawals that nobody bothers to add up until the balance is gone. Daniel worked later. Claire picked up more shifts, partly out of exhaustion with waiting for him, and partly because the overtime helped with a mortgage that had gotten heavier than either of them wanted to admit. They stopped having the kind of conversations that required eye contact. They started having the kind that happened over a shared calendar, logistics disguised as intimacy. 11 months before the morning he filed, Claire had asked him, without any warm-up, whether he still wanted to be married to her. He remembered the specific stupidity of his answer. He'd said, "Why would you ask that?" instead of answering the question. She had looked at him for a long moment, like she was filing the non-answer away for later use, and she'd gone back to folding laundry. They tried, in the loose, half-committed way people try, when neither person has fully admitted the marriage is in trouble. A counselor for 6 sessions, a weekend away that ended in an argument about nothing, which was really an argument about everything. Daniel told himself he was doing the work. What he was actually doing was waiting to see if the problem would resolve itself without requiring him to change anything. It didn't. 9 weeks before the filing, Claire told him she was moving into the guest room. She said it without anger, which somehow made it worse. She said it the way she might have told a patient a diagnosis, clearly, gently, and without room for negotiation. Daniel filed for divorce not because he'd stopped loving her, though it took him a long time to admit that distinction mattered. He filed because he'd convinced himself that loving someone and being capable of showing up for them were 2 different skills, and he had apparently only ever had the first one. He told himself the filing was a mercy. He told himself a lot of things that morning that he would come to regret, with a precision that surprised him. The courthouse on 5th was busy even at 8:45. Daniel sat in a hard plastic chair outside the clerk's window with a folder on his lap, and he did not look at his phone because he had told himself he wasn't going to check whether Claire had texted him back about the house. She hadn't. He knew she hadn't. He checked anyway, twice, in the 20 minutes before his number was called. He filed the papers at 9:14. The clerk, a woman with a name tag that said Priscilla, and the flat efficiency of someone who processed the ends of marriages the way other people processed parking tickets, stamped the documents and slid them back across the counter. You'll get notice of the hearing date by mail, she said. Usually 6 to 8 weeks. Daniel thanked her, which felt like an absurd thing to do, and walked out of the courthouse into a cold, bright March morning. He stood on the steps for a moment longer than he needed to. He had expected to feel something specific, relief maybe, or the clean edge of a decision finally made. What he felt instead was a kind of static, a formless unease that didn't attach itself to anything he could name. His phone rang at 9:52.
He was already in the car, already 3 blocks from the office, already trying to compose the version of himself that would walk into a 9:30 meeting 40 minutes late and pretend nothing unusual had happened that morning. The screen said, Ashford Memorial. He almost didn't answer it. He assumed it was a billing call, an old referral, something administrative. He answered because some old habit in him still answered unknown medical numbers out of a reflex that had nothing to do with logic. Mr. Reyes? A woman's voice, calm in the particular over-controlled way that Daniel would later understand was a professional skill, not a natural state. This is Dana Okoye. I'm a charge nurse at Ashford Memorial. Your wife was brought in about 40 minutes ago. She's stable, but I need you to come to the hospital. Stable, Daniel repeated, because his brain had stopped on the word and hadn't moved past it yet. She's stable now, Dana said. There was a car accident on the Route 9 overpass. She was a passenger, not driving. I don't have full details for you over the phone, but you should come as soon as you can. Daniel does not remember hanging up the phone. He remembers, with strange clarity, the sound of his own turn signal as he pulled a U-turn across 2 lanes of traffic on a street where U-turns were not legal. And he remembers the specific, sick lurch in his stomach that had nothing to do with the car's movement and everything to do with the sentence he kept hearing on a loop. Your wife was brought in about 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes ago was 9:12. 40 minutes ago, he had been sitting in a plastic chair outside a clerk's window, waiting to end his marriage on paper, while somewhere across town, the woman he was divorcing was being cut out of a car. Ashford Memorial's emergency entrance was the kind of controlled chaos that Daniel had never had reason to be inside of before. He gave Claire's name at the desk in a voice that didn't sound like his, and a woman in scrubs led him through 2 sets of doors into a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The exact same smell, he thought absurdly, as the courthouse. Dana Okoye met him outside a curtained bay. She was tall, steady-eyed, with the kind of face that had clearly delivered hard news to a great many people and had learned to do it without flinching, which Daniel found both reassuring and terrifying. She has a concussion, some bruising from the seatbelt, and a fractured wrist, Dana said. Those are the things that will heal predictably. There's something else, and I want to prepare you before you go in, because she asked me to be the one to tell you, rather than telling you herself right away. Daniel's chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with his lungs. Tell me what? Claire is 11 weeks pregnant, Dana said. The ultrasound and triage confirmed a heartbeat. Given the trauma, we're going to be monitoring closely for the next 24 hours, but right now, both mother and baby are stable. Daniel heard the individual words. He understood each one on its own. Together, they refused to arrange themselves into anything he could stand inside of. He opened his mouth to say something, and nothing came out, because the only thing his mind had produced was a single, flat repetition. 11 weeks. 11 weeks ago was late December. Late December was 3 days after Christmas, the one night in the last 4 months that he and Claire had ended up in the same bed instead of separate rooms. Not because anything had been resolved between them, but because the house had been cold and the guest room radiator had been broken, and neither of them had said anything about what it meant. He had assumed, in the days after, that it meant nothing. He understood now, standing in a hospital hallway with a folder of divorce paperwork somewhere behind him in the passenger seat of his car, that it had meant everything,
and neither of them had known it yet. "Does she know I'm here?" he asked, because it was the only sentence he could locate. "She knows we called you," Dana said. "She hasn't asked whether you'd come." Something in that sentence landed harder than anything else that morning. Not because it was cruel. Dana hadn't said it cruelly. It landed hard because it was accurate, and Daniel understood, standing in that hallway, that he had spent the last several months giving his wife every reason to expect that he might not. "I'd like to see her," he said. Dana studied him for a second, the particular assessing look of someone deciding whether a person could be trusted with a room. Then she nodded and pulled back the curtain. Claire was propped up in the hospital bed, a brace on her left wrist, a small bandage above her eyebrow, her hair still matted from the accident in a way that made Daniel's throat close. She looked smaller than he remembered her looking, though he understood, even as he thought it, that she wasn't smaller. He had just not been looking at her closely enough in a long time to remember the actual size of her. She turned her head when he came through the curtain, and something crossed her face that he couldn't fully name. Not relief, not anger. Something more complicated that sat somewhere in between and refused to resolve into either one. "You came," she said. Her voice was rough, thinned by the adrenaline that was clearly wearing off. "Of course I came." He heard how automatic it sounded, how insufficient, and he made himself say something truer. "I got the call and I didn't think. I just drove." She looked at him for a long moment. "You filed this morning," she said. It wasn't a question. "I saw the notification on the joint email an hour ago, right before Marcus's car got hit." Daniel felt something in his chest fold in on itself. Of course she knew. Of course the system had emailed them both the moment the filing went through, an automated confirmation with a case number and a court date estimate, landing in her inbox while she sat in a stranger's car on the way to wherever she'd been going, minutes before that car was struck. "Claire, I didn't know about any of this when I filed. I want you to understand that. I didn't know you were—" He stopped because he still didn't have the shape of the sentence. "I didn't know." "I didn't know either," she said quietly. "I found out 40 minutes ago, on a table, from a nurse holding an ultrasound wand, while you were probably still driving here." She looked at the ceiling for a second, blinking hard. "I don't even know what to do with that information yet. I haven't had time." Daniel pulled the single chair in the bay closer to the bed and sat down, not too close, close enough. "You don't have to do anything with it right now," he said. "Nobody's asking you to have an answer today." "You filed for divorce this morning," she said again, and this time there was an edge in it, not aimed at him exactly, more like she was testing the sentence against the new information to see if it still made sense. "And I'm pregnant. Those two facts exist in the same 24 hours, and I don't know how to hold both of them." "Neither do I," Daniel admitted. "I'm not going to pretend I do." They sat with that for a moment, the monitors doing their quiet, indifferent work beside the bed, a machine somewhere down the hall beeping in a rhythm that had nothing to do with either of them. "Why did you file today?" Claire asked finally, not accusing, just asking. "Why this morning specifically?" Daniel thought about lying, softening it, and then thought better of it because he understood with sudden clarity that softening things was most of what had gotten them here in the first place. "Because I told myself I'd been patient long enough," he said. "Because you moved into the guest room 9 weeks ago, and I read that as an answer instead of a question. Because it was easier to end it cleanly than to sit in the mess of trying to fix it and possibly failing anyway." He looked at his hands. "None of that sounds good when I say it out loud." "No," Claire said. "It doesn't." "I'm not saying it to defend it," Daniel said. "I'm saying it because you asked, and you deserve the real answer, not the one that makes me look better." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, some of the edge had gone out of her voice, replaced by something more tired. I moved into the guest room because I didn't know how to keep asking you to show up and getting nothing back, she said. I wasn't trying to end it. I was trying to get your attention. And it worked, technically. You noticed. You just noticed by leaving instead of staying. Daniel absorbed that the way you absorb something that's true and painful and impossible to argue with. I know, he said. I understand that now. I don't know if understanding it 11 weeks too late does either of us any good. I don't know either, Claire said. Ask me again when I'm not on a fetal monitor. They kept her for observation through the night. Daniel did not leave. He sat in the chair beside her bed through the evening, through the moment a resident came in to check the wrist brace, through the 2 times a nurse adjusted the monitor strap across Claire's stomach, and the room went silent except for the small, rapid, insistent sound of a heartbeat that was not Claire's and was not his, but was, apparently, going to belong to both of them, whether either of them had planned for it or not. Around 8 that evening, Claire's mother arrived, having driven 90 minutes from 2 counties over the moment she heard. And there was a strange, careful negotiation in the room about who was allowed to be there, who Claire wanted there, and Daniel, understanding the position he was in, offered to step out. Claire's mother, a sharp-eyed woman named Louise, who had never fully hidden her opinion of Daniel's late hours and longer absences, looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Sit back down. She wants you here. I can tell by the way she keeps looking at the door when it opens." Daniel sat back down. Louise left around 10, promising to return in the morning, and the room quieted into the particular hush of a hospital at night, the hallway lights dimmed, the machines still working their patient arithmetic. Claire was drifting between sleep and waking, the concussion and exhaustion pulling her under in short intervals. At some point past midnight, she surfaced enough to speak.
Daniel,
"I'm here."
are you staying because you feel like you have to, or because you want to?
He thought about the question longer than a good answer probably required, because he understood that a fast answer, however kind, would sound like a reflex rather than a truth. "I think I came because I had to," he said slowly. "I think somewhere around 6 o'clock this evening that stopped being true, and now I'm staying because there's nowhere else I want to be." Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's a very careful answer." "It's an honest one," Daniel said. "I'm trying to only give you honest ones from now on, even when they're not clean." She let out something that was almost a laugh, thin and exhausted. "Well, that would be new." Morning came in gray through the hospital blinds. Claire's vitals had stabilized overnight, the baby's heart rate steady and strong on every check, and by 9 o'clock the attending physician, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Halloran, came by to discuss discharge. The concussion required rest and monitoring. The wrist would need a proper cast once the swelling went down. The pregnancy, remarkably, appeared entirely unaffected by the trauma. "You're a lucky pair," Dr. Halloran said, glancing between them in a way that made Daniel realize the hospital staff had, understandably, assumed they were simply a married couple expecting a baby, with no visibility into the folder sitting in Daniel's car. Neither of them corrected him. When the doctor left, Claire looked at Daniel for a long moment. "We have a lot to figure out," she said. "And I want to be honest with you. I don't know what the answer is yet. I don't know if this changes what I decided 9 weeks ago, or if it just makes deciding harder." "I'm not going to pressure you into anything," Daniel said. "I filed those papers yesterday morning believing it was the right call. I still don't know if it was wrong. What I know is that I don't want to make another decision about us from inside my own head, alone, without you in the room. I did that once. I'm not doing it again." "So, what are you asking for?" "Time," Daniel said, Not an answer today. Not a reversal of the filing just because of what happened. Just time, in the room, actually paying attention this time, before either of us decides anything permanent. Claire studied him with the particular clinical patience of someone who had spent a career reading whether people were telling the truth in moments of crisis. "You understand that's not nothing to ask," she said. "You're asking me to keep the door open while you show me whether you can actually change, with a baby now sitting in the middle of the decision."
I know what I'm asking.
Daniel said.
I'm asking anyway, because the alternative is walking out of this hospital and letting the version of me that filed those papers be the last version of me you ever really knew. And I don't think that version was the whole truth. I think he was scared and tired, and he took the easy way out of a hard problem. I'd like the chance to be a different version, even if it takes a long time to prove it.
Claire didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hand resting against the small, barely visible curve of her stomach, a gesture Daniel understood, without being told, was not conscious.
Okay,
She said finally.
time. No promises beyond that.
No promises beyond that, Daniel agreed. I'll withdraw the filing. Not because I expect it to fix anything by itself, just because I don't want it sitting between us while we try to figure out what this actually is. The weeks that followed did not look like a fast reconciliation, because fast reconciliations are mostly a fiction, a shortcut real people rarely get. Daniel drove Claire to every follow-up appointment. He learned, slowly and without being told, the difference between being present and being merely nearby, the difference between sitting in the same room scrolling through his phone and sitting in the same room actually listening when she talked about how tired she was, how frightened she still felt some mornings, how the accident had left a version of anxiety in her that hadn't existed before. He went to 2 sessions with Claire's therapist and then found his own, a decision he made without being asked, which surprised her more than almost anything else he did in that stretch of months. He learned, in slow increments, to say the uncomfortable thing out loud in the moment it happened instead of 6 weeks later, after it had curdled into resentment. He learned to notice when he was defaulting to the old pattern, going quiet, going distant, disappearing into work as a way of not feeling something, and to name it before it calcified into another closed door. There was a difficult night in May, 7 weeks after the accident, when Claire told him she'd overheard him on a call, half joking with a colleague, about getting the paperwork sorted eventually, and the old fear had come roaring back, that he was simply waiting out a decent interval before finishing what he'd started in March. He hadn't meant it that way. He explained, and she listened, and it did not resolve instantly, and that was, Daniel came to understand, exactly how real repair worked. Not a single grand gesture that erased the damage, but 100 small corrections, made honestly, in real time. There was another moment, quieter than the one about the phone call, but harder in its own way, that happened in late June. Claire had a routine appointment that Daniel missed, not out of neglect, but because of a genuine scheduling collision at the firm, a client emergency that landed at the exact hour of her checkup. He called her the moment he realized, apologized without excuse-making, and offered to leave the meeting anyway if she wanted him there. She told him not to, that it was fine, that these things happened. But when he got home that evening, he could tell by the careful flatness in her voice that it hadn't felt fine at all. It had felt, to her, like the first crack in a pattern she'd spent months hoping was actually gone. He didn't argue with her feeling. He sat with her at the kitchen table and let her say the hard thing, which was that a missed appointment, however reasonable the excuse, had put her right back in the version of herself that used to wait by a phone that didn't ring. "I need you to understand," she said, "that it's not really about the appointment. It's about whether I can trust that when something comes up, you'll choose differently than you used to." Daniel didn't defend himself. He said, "You're right to notice it. I'm not going to pretend the excuse erases what it felt like on your end." Then he did something he hadn't done in the old version of their marriage. He asked her what would have actually helped, in the moment, instead of assuming he already knew. She said a text, just one line, would have been enough. He hadn't sent one. He told her he'd get it right next time, and for the rest of the pregnancy, he did, without fail, whether it was a 2-minute update or a full missed hour explained in advance. It was a small thing. It was also, Daniel understood later, one of the moments that mattered most, because it was proof that repair wasn't a single dramatic gesture, but a willingness to keep correcting course in the unglamorous, ordinary places where trust actually lives or dies. By August, the rhythm between them had changed in ways that were hard to point to directly, but impossible to miss if you'd known them before. Claire stopped bracing when Daniel's phone buzzed at dinner. Daniel stopped filling silences with work talk as a way of avoiding harder conversations. They fought exactly twice in that stretch of months. Real fights, not the clipped, withholding silences that had defined the year before the filing. And both times, they came back to the table within a day. Not because the anger had disappeared, but because neither of them was willing to let it calcify into distance the way it once had. At 20 weeks, they learned they were having a son. Claire cried in the ultrasound room in a way that surprised her, and Daniel, standing beside the exam table, found that he could not speak at all for almost a full minute. And when he finally did, all he managed was, "I want to be here for every single one of these. Not because I have to be, because I can't imagine being anywhere else." Claire looked at him for a long moment, the wand still resting against her stomach, the small, fluttering heartbeat filling the room. "Ask me again in a year whether you meant that," she said. But she was smiling when she said it. The first, full, unguarded smile Daniel had seen from her since the accident. And something in his chest loosened in a way he hadn't let himself hope for. Their son, Owen, was born in October, 7 months after the morning that had begun with a courthouse filing and ended with a hospital room and a heartbeat neither of them had expected to hear that day. Daniel was in the delivery room. He did not try to manage anything. He stood where he was told to stand and held Claire's hand when she asked for it, and said nothing when she needed silence. And when Owen was placed against her chest, small and furious and entirely new, Daniel understood, watching his wife's face, that he was looking at the actual center of his life, the thing he had almost let slip past him on a cold March morning because he had mistaken exhaustion for certainty. They did not remarry immediately. Claire was careful about that, deliberately so, and Daniel understood why and did not push. What they built instead, over the following year, was something quieter and more durable than a single ceremony could have provided. A rhythm of small, repeated choices. Daniel came home at a reasonable hour, not as a performance, but because he had learned, finally, what the hours had actually cost. Claire, slowly, let her guard down in the places it had been necessary for her own protection, and found, to her own surprise, that the man showing up now bore only a partial resemblance to the one who had filed those papers. On Owen's first birthday, sitting in their kitchen long after the small party had ended and the last of the cake had been put away, Claire asked him, almost offhandedly, whether he ever thought about that morning at the courthouse. "Every day," Daniel said. "Not because I regret how it ends, because I think about how close I came to never finding out how it could have gone differently." Claire reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand that had once signed papers meant to end everything, now resting easily inside hers. "We got lucky," she said. "No," Daniel said. "We got a second chance. Luck is what put you in that car. What we did with it after, that part was a choice. Every single day of it." Outside, the evening settled over the house the way ordinary evenings do, indifferent to everything that had almost been lost inside it. And somewhere down the hall, Owen slept, whole and unaware of how close his own beginning had come to happening inside the ruins of something instead of the rebuilding of it.